Assalamualaikum and good day to all. I am Zulhilmy Rozali from EDDP 1024 class. My presentation today focuses on the policy framework and policy implementation analysis of the Malaysia Education Blueprint 2013 to 2025, also known as PPPM. This blueprint is one of the most significant education reforms introduced by the Malaysian government to improve the quality and competitiveness of the national education system. In this presentation, I will discuss three main aspects. First, I will explain the policy framework used to analyze the blueprint. Second, I will examine how the policy is implemented within the education system, including the roles of different stakeholders. Third, I will highlight implementation challenge and potential improvements based on policy analysis. Although the blueprint outlines many important reforms such as improving teacher quality and integrating technology into education, the success of these reforms depends on how effectively they are implemented at school level. This presentation evaluates not only the design of the policy but also how well the policy works in practice within the Malaysian education system. Okay, next. Introduction. Education policy plays a fundamental role in shaping the direction of the country's education system. Through well-designed policies, governments aim to improve access to education, the quality of learning outcomes, and equality of opportunities among students. However, designing a good policy alone is not enough. Many education reforms fail because there is a gap between policy design and policy implementation. In other words, policy may look effective on paper but face challenges when applied in real schools and classrooms. For example, a policy may promote innovative teaching methods such as student centered learning or digital learning. However, if teachers are not adequately trained, or if schools lack proper facilities, the policy may not achieve its intended outcomes. Therefore, analyzing both policy frameworks and policy implementation is essential in understanding whether an education reform can achieve its goal. In this presentation, use the Malaysian Education Blueprint 2013 to 2025 as a case study to analyze how education policy works within a real national education system. So, understanding both policy design and implementation is essential for evaluating the effectiveness of education reforms. Background of the policy. The Malaysia Education Blueprint was introduced in 2013 as part of a national effort to transform the education system. The policy was developed following a comprehensive review conducted by the Ministry of Education together with international organizations such as the OECD and the World Bank. The blueprint focused on improving several key aspects of the education system. One important goal is improving the quality of education, particularly in areas such as teaching standard and student learning outcomes. Another goal is reducing achievement gaps, especially between urban and rural schools. The blueprint also emphasized the development of human capital that can compete globally, which is important for Malaysia's economic growth in the knowledge-based economy. To guide these reforms, the blueprint outlines five system aspirations, namely access, quality, equity, unity, and efficiency. The aspirations of equity aims to ensure that students from different socio-economic backgrounds receive equal learning opportunities. The Malaysia Education Blueprint provides a comprehensive national strategy to strengthen the education system and prepare students for future challenges. Policy cycle framework. To analyze the Malaysia education blueprint, the study used the policy cycle framework, which is widely used in public policy analysis. This framework explains that policies typically go through several stages. The first stage is agenda setting, where policymakers identify important issues that require government intentions. In the case of Malaysia, concerns about students' performance in international assessments such as PISA have placed education reform on the national agenda. The second stage is policy formulation, where policymakers design strategies to address the identified problem. For PPPM, this involves consultation within educators, researchers, and international experts. Next is policy adoption, which refers to the official approval of the policy by the government. After that comes policy implementation, where the policy is applied within institutions such as schools. Finally, policy evaluation assess whether the policy achieved its intended outcomes. Therefore, the policy cycles help us understand how education policy evolved from problem identification to policy outcomes. Structure of policy implementation. Policy implementation occurs at multiple levels within the education system. At the macro level, the Ministry of Education Malaysia is responsible for designing policies, allocating funding, and setting national guidelines. For example, the ministry determines curriculum reforms and teacher training programs. At the meso level, implementation occurs within school and educational organization. School leaders, such as principals and administrators, play an important role in interpreting policies and ensuring that they are applied effectively in the schools. For instance, a school principal may introduce professional learning communities to help teachers improve their teaching practice. At the micro level, policy implementation occurs directly in classrooms. Teachers are responsible for translating policy ideas into actual teaching practice, while students experience the outcomes of those policies. For example, if a policy promotes higher order thinking skills, teacher must incorporate activities such as project-based learning or collaborative discussions. Therefore, successful policy implementation requires coordination across macro, meso, and micro levels. Okay, next. Next, we will discuss about the gap between policy intent and practice. One of the most common issues in policy implementation is the gap between policy intent and policy practice. This means that although policies clearly state their objective, the actual practice in schools may differ due to practical constraints. One important challenge is teacher readiness. Teacher may not always have the training or support needed to implement new teaching approach. Another challenge is administrative workload. Teachers often face heavy administrative responsibilities which may limit the time available for innovative teaching practice. Resource inequality is also a major issue. Schools in rural areas may lack access to technology or learning materials compared to urban schools. Additionally, the effectiveness of school leadership can influence how policy are implemented. Strong leadership can encourage teachers to adopt new teaching practice, while weak leadership may hinder policy implementation. Therefore, reducing the gap between policy intention and classroom practice is essential for successful education reform. Okay, next we will discuss about implementation action plan. To address implementation challenge, several strategic actions can be introduced. First, teacher professional development should be strengthened. Continuous training programs can help teachers develop skills in digital learning, student-centered teacher, and higher order thinking activities. Second, improving school leadership capacity is important. School principals should be trained as instructional leaders who support teachers and promote innovative teaching practice. Third, the government should invest in digital infrastructure, particularly in rural areas. This includes providing internet access, digital device, and learning platforms. Fourth, monitoring system should be improved. Using data such as student performance report and school evaluation results can help policymakers identify problems early and implement improvements. In short, effective implementation requires collaboration between policymakers, school leaders, and also teachers. Case study: Digital learning during COVID 19. A useful example of policy implementation can be seen during the COVID 19 pandemic when schools were forced to shift to online learning. This situation accelerated digital transformation in education as teachers and students had to use online platforms for teaching and learning. However, the pandemic also exposed several structural challenges. For instance, many rural schools face limited internet access and lack digital device. Teachers also experience difficulties adapting to online teaching methods, especially if they had limited experience with digital learning tools. Students from low income families were particularly affected because they did not always have access to reliable internet or personal device. This case study demonstrates that technology integration in education requires not only policy support but also sufficient infrastructure and training. Therefore, digital learning policies must consider both technological resource and human capacity. Comparative policy analysis. Comparing, comparing, Comparing Malaysia with other high-performing education systems can provide useful policy insights. For example, Finland is widely recognized for its strong emphasis on teacher professionalism and autonomy. Teachers are highly trained and trusted to design their own teaching methods based on students' needs. In contrast, Singapore adopts a more centralized education system where the government closely coordinates and monitors education policies. Singapore also emphasizes STEM education and technological innovation. Both countries achieve strong performance in international assessments such as PISA, but they adopt different policy approach. These examples suggest that successful education system typically combine strong teacher professionalism, effective leadership, and consistent policy monitoring. Therefore, Malaysia can learn valuable lessons from both Finland and Singapore when strengthening its education policies. Last but not least, conclusion and recommendations. In conclusion, the Malaysia Education Blueprint represents an important step towards transforming the national education system. The blueprint provides a comprehensive policy framework that addresses key aspects such as teacher quality, school leadership, and technology integration. However, the success of the policy depends largely on how effectively it is implemented at the school level. Challenges such as teacher readiness, leadership capacity, and resource inequality must be addressed to ensure successful policy outcomes. Looking forward, the upcoming Malaysia Education Blueprint 2026 to 2035 aims to continue the transformation of the education system by focusing on innovation, future skills, and reducing educational inequalities. In summary, effective education reform requires not only well designed policies but also strong institutional capacity and collaboration among all stakeholders in the education systems. Thank you. Thank you for your attention, questions, and discussions. Welcome. That's all for me. Thank you.